Inclusion is not just including special needs children in mainstream schools, which is the way some people do. It's not about holding back on exclusion, the keep them in or kick them out debate.
And let's not forget that it's only 20 years ago when a number of the children who now give us problems actually wouldn't be in school, and certainly not in a school which asks them to sit at a desk with a pen and answer a worksheet.
As far as education is concerned, there are many policymakers. As far as the children are concerned, the key policymaker is the teacher in the classroom.
40 years ago, we had an education system that was really largely around an elite group of youngsters. We had only a very small group of young people going forward into higher education, for example. Now, in the intervening period since then, more and more young people have benefited from our education system.
Within national strategy, we're always talking about behaviour and attendance, two words that some people find rather strange to put together. And it's worth asking the question, why behaviour and attendance? Well, I've always believed there's no more extreme form of behaviour than not attending in school. But not only that, when you look at the issue of attendance and you look at it in terms of inclusion, if you're going to help children attend in schools, you've got to do something about it. It's much more than truancy sweeps and checking the register and all of those things. You need to get at the causes of that non-attendance. And when you get at the causes of that non-attendance, they're usually the same as those that create poor behaviour. And so if you address the causes, and your approach in school is to do that, to find solutions to those problems that present themselves for behaviour and attendance, you save a huge amount of time if you're working to the common causes that are there. And it's those causes of disaffection, it's those causes of non-engagement within school, it's those issues of children not feeling included in the institution that lead to both poor behaviour and poor attendance.
Well, if you take either behaviour or attendance, first of all, schools will have set very high standards that are clearly understood by the youngsters concerned. Here are the things that we stand for as a school. Here's what we consider to be acceptable or unacceptable. Let me give you an example. In attendance, often late coming to school is something that needs to be tackled before you tackle the underpinning problem of poor attendance. Now, in some schools, people will drift in and there's not really a particularly tight attitude. I know in schools where the head teacher will stand there and wait and deal with the youngsters if they drift in late. And very quickly, of course, that sets a tone for the whole school. It is not acceptable to turn up late to this school. It is not acceptable to drift in and out when you like to. So I think head teachers are very clear with senior managers exactly what the acceptable standards of behaviour are.
What we're talking about is a school that is managed by people who have a commitment to certain principles, who set a vision of the school, but who then encourage a great deal of participation in offering leadership at all sorts of different stages in different ways, and where everybody feels a sense of empowerment in that respect.
Inclusion is an attitude of mind, really, and it's an attitude of mind that needs to be underpinned by strong beliefs and values. There's one particular value I think that shines out for me in the relation to that, and it's the equal value principle, first espoused by Pat Daunt in his book on comprehensive values back in the 70s. At that time there was a lot of talk about comprehensive schools providing equal opportunity, and what Pat Daunt said was that equal opportunity is a hollow promise for children. What they need is not just equal opportunity, what they need is to have their opportunity tailored to their particular needs.
If you talk to head teachers about some of the most difficult youngsters they have to deal with, those youngsters will not necessarily just be facing educational difficulties. They may be experiencing problems at home. There may be issues of criminality. There may be difficulties of health or drugs.
I think the first thing to pick up on is that leadership in schools is not just a prerogative of head teachers. It's often said that everybody in a school is a leader. The teacher in the classroom or the supervisor at lunchtime are playing leadership roles. So leadership is something that needs to pervade an institution. the common values and common principles that underpin that leadership need to be shared and need to be owned by everybody throughout the school. And so I think the first task in terms of inclusion for leadership is to work in ways that are going to bring together everybody for common values and common beliefs, so they're expressed and used when it comes to the teaching and learning of children. Because we all know that fundamentally that's what schools are there for. We want to help children learn, we want to teach well, and to do that you need to be inclusive-minded, because every child needs that opportunity.
There's schools where teachers have a very positive approach to children. Yes, they'll admonish children, but they'll admonish the action and not the actor. They will ask questions about why, and they will act on the why. They will have some understanding of the impact on the lives of children of situations outside of school. They will understand that Johnny, who's come to school today without breakfast, without any real love or warmth in the morning, is actually pretty raw when he's arrived at school. He may or she may have had to get themselves into school by themselves. We don't often find teachers paying a great deal of understanding to those sorts of aspects of kids coming into school and the baggage they bring with them. We expect them all too often to leave that baggage outside the classroom and come in and be a model student. That's not going to happen.
It's not easy for schools to make connections with a wide range of agencies outside. I mean, after all, we don't want head teachers or teachers to become social workers or community workers. The best thing that teachers can do for children and young people is to offer them a good education. But often that's not enough. We need to ensure that schools make those connections with the outside agencies, and we shouldn't underestimate the time and effort that it takes.
We've got to keep reminding ourselves that we're here not just to make children or help children behave better, or to attend regularly. The purpose of all of this is to help children learn and to teach them well, so that that learning is maximised. And so in all we do, we've got to remember that end product. Getting there is the challenge. And in particular, it's a challenge when it comes to setting standards for children who have behavioural difficulties and present challenging issues for staff.
Now, I think there are encouraging signals there, because the government is keen to ensure that schools have a greater say in what happens in terms of the allocation and distribution of other services like community support, like social care, like speech therapists. And I think that's positive, but I don't underestimate the difficulties for schools in making this happen. Most head teachers I speak to, however, are up for that challenge, because they see it as being substantially better than the position that they find themselves in at the moment, where often they feel that they're having to tackle these wide range of social problems unsupported.
Sometimes I think we set far too low standards for those children. We're satisfied with small gains. They have the right to have high standards expected of them too, in all that we do. So there's another purpose here of making certain that in including those children in the education process, we're not working dual standards in what they do.
I hope that the changes that we're seeing to the curriculum, particularly for secondary age pupils, will help some youngsters who are disaffected. And I think it takes courage on the part of head teachers to say we are going to, in a sense, nail our colours to the mast. We are going to be an inclusive school. Perhaps that won't always show up in the test results or the examination results or the league tables, but there's a moral imperative to ensure that we provide a good education for all of our youngsters. And here I think that Ofsted inspection can help, because of course inspection doesn't just look at the examination performance or the test performance, it will look at these other things that matter. What's the ethos like in the school? How does the management and leadership give direction and establish sound values for the school. So I think inspection can capture the best of the inclusive school.
I always remember in my first school that I went to as a head, walking down the corridor one day, and there was all mayhem going on in the lesson. So in true headship style, I barged in through the door to be greeted by this kid who said to me, "It's okay, sir, we're non-French." I was a bit puzzled by that, but on reflection afterwards, what he meant was, we're a bunch of kids who have a different curriculum to everybody else, and because we're no good academically, it's perfectly okay for us to muck about in lessons and get nowhere.
They are schools which are essentially listening schools. They listen to each other, adult to adult. They listen to children, they listen to parents, they listen to their community. Core to the whole thing is what we called, in one of the pieces of research we did, we called the critical mass of staff who have a shared set of values, attitudes and beliefs, which are espoused quite clearly. So a school can tell you what it believes. It's not a dry document, it's not a mission statement, a vision statement, those have their importance, but it's something that's lived. And part of that living is about respect, dignity. As a child once said to me, when I said, why are you behaving so well here and not at the school which permanently excluded me? And his maybe trite, but nonetheless very effective answer for me was, I get dignity here. And dignity is about listening. It is about spending some time. And that's a precious commodity in a school. But it's a commodity which we need to spend in listening to children.
The question of what to look at when you're looking at a school to say how far has it made progress in an inclusive direction, in some ways is quite difficult because it can take many different forms. I think, for example, of one primary school here in the city of Manchester, which I believe to be a really effective school and that has moved in an inclusive direction. It serves a really poor, one of the poorest wards in the country. And when you go into the school, almost immediately one of the things that strikes you is music and choirs. The school has lots and lots of choirs, and almost every child in the school is in the choir. And what the head teacher and the staff of that school have done is they've used music and they've used choirs to make every child feel valued and make every child feel that they can make a contribution. But it's also created a sense of identity in the school, which is recognised within the school, and of course, because it's successful, is recognised outside the school. Now, I'm not suggesting choirs are the recipe for becoming more inclusive, but what I'm saying is it's about bringing people together into a sense of we believe in something and we're going to fight for it and we're going to work collaboratively. Collaboration is at the heart of this, there's no question.
There is the issue that you've got to actually believe that behaviour can change, that the child who's giving you behaviour which you deem to be inappropriate, is causing you difficulties, that behaviour can be changed. You've got to believe that, because otherwise, why actually engage? You need to have very clear communication with the child, which does involve the listening bit, but also involves a third thing, and that's honesty. That's not being brutal with children, but it is saying, this is how I feel. When you do this, this is how I feel. This is what you are actually doing. Explaining to children with a degree of clarity the effect of their behaviour, which we often think they know because they're attention-seeking or something else that we can glibly attach to it. Very often they don't, and they're not totally aware of the impact of their behaviour until it's pretty spectacular. But the constant niggling behaviour of not bringing a pencil or not attending or chatting in the corner or chewing gum, those irritating behaviours that the Elton report said were really the bulk of what are the behaviour problems in school. Children don't understand. It's not blatantly obvious to them.
The most effective leader, far more effective than I was at head, that I've ever come across, was a lunchtime supervisor that I worked with. She'd got the knack I wish I could have sort of bottled it and distilled it and sprinkled it on everybody so that we were all able to manage the pupils in the way that she did. But the great feature she had was that her management was very active. When you watched her around the school, she engaged with the children everywhere she went. It was a bit like when I first started teaching. I still remember on the first day of my first school, my head of department said to me, "Right, come on, Chris," he said, at break time, we're going to have a cup of coffee down in the staff room. I'll show you how to work that machine. It's pretty awful coffee, but, you know, we're going to... He said, on the way, he said, "I'll show you corridormanship." And as we set off down the corridor, as he went by, he greeted the vast majority of pupils as he went along and stopped and had a chat with them, a word, an issue, etc., etc. And as he was moving around that school, he was setting standards. Now, the lunchtime supervisor I worked with did exactly the same thing. She worked with all the pupils, and she had the place well organised. She had her staff working with her. She had a huge sense of humour. She had a laugh that... it was just phenomenal. You could hear it booming around the playground. And everybody knew she was there, everybody knew who she was, and they knew they could turn to her for advice or issues or whatever, and she did a phenomenal job. Probably the best in-service training day we ever had in our school was when she came along for a period of that time and just sat on a table and talked to the staff about what she did. And it was an eye-opener for some people because she talked about the kids as well that she was working with. And there were many of the pupils that people found challenging and difficult in the classroom. And the really funny thing was, the next day I kept coming across staff who'd come out at lunchtime, very busy time for staff, lunchtimes, and they'd found a little bit of time to come out and you know, peering around the corner and watching Jean to see what she was up to. It was very telling, really. She got the knack.
And what I see in schools that do make progress is that the notion of being inclusive is not just about the children. It's about everybody in the school community. And a feature of a school that does make progress, without any question, in my experience, is the school becomes a better place to be for the children, but also for the adults, not least for the teachers. Because effectively, you're creating a more supportive environment, a more welcoming environment, and put simply, a happier place to live and work in that sense. So teachers feel valued. Teaching assistants feel valued, learning mentors feel valued, the caretaker, the secretary, everybody feels that they're part of an entity which is worth contributing to and that for which they are valued for the contributions in which they're making. So the vision of an inclusive school, I think, is very much about orchestrating the collaboration between many people, many stakeholders.
When we're talking about inclusion, I think we need to remember a very, very important fact. If you look at the statistics about the huge achievements that have been in education over the last 30 years and the improvements in standards that we've seen, by and large, those children who've been achieving well before are achieving better, and those children who've been achieving really well before are achieving excellently. But there's about a 30% population who over the last 30 years we've singularly failed to reach. They are those pupils often that present the behavioural problems. And they present the behavioural problems because they've not been engaged in the education process in schools, and they present that non-engagement and that disaffection through their behaviour. So I think we've always got to remember that those of us that work in this field of behaviour and attendance, and particularly those people who will lead that agenda, need to remember that agenda is focused on a population that other people are not working with particularly well. It's the Heineken effect. We're going to reach the parts that others are not reaching. And I believe that the way forward is to establish within schools people who do know how to engage with those pupils, who do know how to help them with high standards of expectation, of behaviour and attendance and learning to make progress. And that's the great achievement that we need to work towards when it comes to looking at the leadership of behaviour and attendance. You know, 80% of referrals to senior staff in schools come from 20% of the staff. It's also the case, we did a quick survey, that in an average secondary school of 1,000 pupils, the senior leadership team is spending about 200 days a year, for want of a better term, bollocking naughty kids. And it's this issue, it's just like it was in Kes, those children lined up outside the head teacher's office, in that case waiting for a caning, but in most cases waiting for a good bollocking, basically, to try and establish discipline and arrangements in schools. Well, it doesn't work. The senior staff don't have the opportunity to get to the causes of the problem. All you're doing is repressing it, and that's not going to improve teaching and learning.